famous picture of the common room, a newly appointed Routh in front of the long demolished stone arch by Old Chapel. Manual mowing before the original building, the first team photograph. Routh's apartments, now schoolhouse, were added in 1901. Old Chapel, in all its pre-Raphaelite glory, now lost. Every OB who fought worshipped here. Little changed, but the headmaster's house is now to the left. The old headmaster's house left, Millington's beloved rockery and big school, built of sandstone and a finer building than appears on first sight. The fine interior. Commemoration, assemblies, lock-up, all took place here, and the names of the dead were read here too. The 11, born to lead. It was said that the Battle of Waterloo was won on the playing fields of Eton. The First World War partly on Lower Chalford. An astonishing percentage of those killed played in the only two teams at the time. They were thinner then. A sleek first 15, gods to the school. Playing Birmingham University. Big side has not changed. An extraordinary photo. Note the early schoolhouse logo. He had 3 years to live. The idyllic playground, gymnasium, fives court. High boots, newly formed, many would fight. Cadets below a dirigible. The contingent. Routh and his boys, 7 will die, almost a fifth. An elite to rule an empire. Those blazers. All fought, 6 died. The first proper teaching block. Opened 20 days before an assassination triggered a world war. Lord Bryce had just stepped down as ambassador to the United States and was a close friend of President Teddy Roosevelt. It was a hot day, the kind of day on which one can see the heat quivering over the dusty roads and hedges, and the only sound that disturbs the stifling quiet is a motor horn, and even that seems hot and tired. Therefore, being wise, we had retired to the most secluded retreat, the library. There we sat with that old world atmosphere around us and thought of the many scenes that room had witnessed. By chance, we picked up an ancient volume of the Bromsgrove and read in it the writings of our predecessors, and then we passed in our thoughts to the present and to the future, that perhaps, in years to come, some future Bromsgrovian would think the same things of us, nay, might even read these very words and wonder what we were like, we who lived at the time of the Great War, and feel a certain pride in all those who had fought in it, and in those names they saw, in all those pages of the volume set about with a deep black line. And from that same pride might gain resolution to carry and hand on more worthily the torch which these had kept burning bright and passed on unsullied. When school broke up, no one expected war. The editor of the Bromsgrovian could write confidently.
We ourselves are dreaming of 7 weeks' glorious rest, of the briny sea and of all its pleasures. And by the time this appears in print, those dreams will be very near fulfillment. Is it not therefore our duty to wish everyone the best of weather and the best of everything during the long summer holidays?
Thus ended peacetime. During the holidays, war began, and by November, a very different editorial.
Never have our predecessors been faced with such a situation as we are. In face of nations at death grips, words fail us. And the complaint we have now is not the lack of subject matter, but such overwhelming quantity as defies the limits of ordinary prose. All those who have just left us, together with many of whom we only know the names, and who left many years ago, are serving the King in all positions. Some are at the front, and one has already met his death in a manner worthy of the best traditions of the school. The keenness of patriotism is not only displayed by OBs, but among present members of the school. Many long to enlist, only prevented by age and parental authority. Their energies find outlet in the work of the OTC, which is being trained with double effort, and whose numbers are considerably increased. Football, though by no means discouraged, having to give way to military efficiency.
The first obituary.
Lieutenant Routh, Lieutenant Berkeley, Connaught Rangers, killed in action 14th September. The 15-11 head monitor, colour sergeant OTC.
His parents, well-known brewers in Worcester, presented a reading desk in his memory. Here it is.
The Worcester Herald.
Worcester should know the glorious details of the death of one of her sons. One fellow, Berkeley, earned the military cross twice over before being killed. He was hit in the leg, went back and got dressed, and hobbled up to the firing line cheering his men on. He was hit again, and did ditto, getting back just as his fellows were breaking. He rallied them, and drove the Germans on, only to be shot when the situation was saved.
In football prospects,
The fight has begun on a vaster field than that of rugby, and our struggles must sink into comparative insignificance and suffering. Our complaint is that we do want to fight, but war has wiped out our match list.
Bromsgrovians served in regiments wonderfully diverse and historic.
The Royal Flying Corps, Worcestershire Regiment, 7th Welsh Fusiliers, Birmingham City Battalion, Royal Warwick's, Motor Ambulance, Royal Anglesey, Artists' Rifles, Public Schools Battalion, Royal Fusiliers, Liverpool Scottish, New Zealand Force, Munster Fusiliers, Oxford and Bucks Light Infantry, the 51st Seats, the Saskatchewan Regiment.
The war was closely followed by the boys.
The headmaster is giving a series of instructive talks which are much appreciated. Large-scale maps of the theatres of the war have been placed in Kypless.
They expected the boys home by Christmas, but in December,
A whole term has passed, and we are still in the throes of the greatest war the world has ever seen. So far, it does not make any great outward difference in the seclusion of school life, which continues its daily round much as usual. Though few are as yet at the front, OBs have already won honours in the firing line. DSOs gained by Dent and Russell, to whom we offer our heartiest congratulations.
the headmaster gave a morning off to honour them. Thousands of Belgian refugees flocked to Britain, and some to Bromsgrove, where townsfolk rallied to assist. Isaiah Burnell, our director of music, composer, friend of Elgar, arranged a concert, the Bromsgrove Messenger.
As was to be expected of any concert directed by Mr. Burnell, the programme was full of good items, exceedingly well done.
It raised £6. New library books were dominated by war.
Warships and their story, the Royal Navy, why we are at war, Germany and the next war, from the trenches, and famous landfalls.
As 1914 ended, only one OB had died so far. Routh was on the move.
We congratulate the headmaster and Miss Routh upon their removal into the new house. We have had the privilege of inspecting it, and all we could say was that we should be very glad. We hear that even the workmen were attacked with violent envy for their lucky possessors.
Machiavelli wrote,
Wars begin when you will, but do not end when you please.
the debating society tackled the motion,
That the war is not likely to last more than to the end of the present year.
And prophetically, Mackay stated that
Belgium was one mass of trenches, through which the Allies would have the greatest difficulty in pushing back the Germans.
and the President noted,
Trench warfare might last indefinitely.
a great honour for the school was announced for someone who died in what is now a Taliban stronghold.
His Majesty the King has been graciously pleased to award the Victoria Cross to Catherine Jotham, 51st Successive Kings. 32nd Mounted Infantry of the Northern Brazilian Militia was sent with 3 British officers to relieve an isolated outpost threatened by a large tribal army of up to 10,000. Retreat was essential at the Gallop if our troops were not to be surrounded and cut off. The attempt was made in 3 parties, the last of the Jothams.
His commanding officer wrote,
He lost his life in a gallant attempt to save an unhorsed soul. There was time for him to have gone through, but the delay allowed the enemy to swarm down from the cliffs and fire from close range. It was a glorious death to have died. We are all proud of him and grateful to him for setting such a magnificent example, especially valuable in a critical time like the present one.
a letter from a Major Hill to the boy's father is remarkable.
Our acquaintance only lasted 6 hours, but I summed up your son as one of the most striking men that I had ever met. In 1913, I was in the rear coach of the Glasgow Express, which was telescoped by the Edinburgh Express at Aisley.
16 were killed.
I noticed a man working with ceaseless energy and pluck on the top of the compartment, already a mass of flames, handing out the poor people, the while talking to them as if nothing was at stake, and cheering them with kind words. His hair singed, his coat and cap on fire, working quite unconcernedly to the last. This was your boy.
Hill received a regimental card from him.
It is hard to be shut up in a sun-baked fort, but I long to be in France, where I hope you know one.
And Hill wrote,
But to my sincere regret, the letter was returned marked, deceased, killed in action. Hearing of his photograph in the Illustrated London News, I write to you. Had he died with less honour to himself and glory to his country, I should have been surprised. I had never met a man who filled me with greater confidence in his personality and strength of character. He was one of those Englishmen who, for centuries, have made the country famous and have made and extended our vast empire without thought for himself and with no blowing of trumpets. I am proud and glad to have met him and shall carry his memory with me until my death. I then hope that I shall again meet him. If you have a photograph of him and can spare one, I shall be most truly thankful to you.
The VC was presented to his father by King George V at Buckingham Palace. He's buried in the Mirenshah Cemetery, commemorated on the Delhi Memorial, and a plaque is in the Garrison Church, Whittington Barracks, Lichfield. The war was deeply felt now.
More and more each day is the reality of the war being brought home to us here at school. When it began, it was affirmed that it would be waged at no light cost, and this we now realise to the full. It is hard for a school to appreciate such great external disturbances, except insofar as their friends, relations, or daily necessaries are affected. But we too now begin to see the sterner side. The head monitor of last year is already on service abroad.
The Corps was digging trenches below Caicos.
Which provided intense enjoyment until the novelty wore off, together with the skin from their hands. Nevertheless, all were most proud of their own sections and most reluctant to fill them in again.
It was a harsh spring, but the snow gave us a chance of experiencing the almost unprecedented joys of tobogganing. 30 of us managed to snatch a day of it. Technology proceeded apace.
A new era has been marked by the universal introduction of synchronized electric clocks. As there are clocks in the choir, in the schoolhouse, the dining hall, on the Caicos building, which is in full view of Gordon House, and in all the new classrooms, it's now impossible, theoretically, to be late for anything.
In a reading of Much Ado About Nothing in the headmaster's dining room, Routh's sister
gave a delightful rendering of Beatrice. She so brought out the character of the vivacious and capricious young lady to perfection, and we wish the society in general would acquire her art of reading so naturally and skillfully as to make us think, as we shut our eyes, that we're in the streets of Messingham.
Bach was heavily criticised.
His whole idea seems to be to get to the end of his speech as quickly as decently possible. He is improving, but this cannot be said of Gurney, who struggles painfully and with apparent difficulty to the end of his speeches, and, what is worse, stumbles over the words.
The OTC met the King Edward's contingent in a heavy snowstorm for operations. They took part in a recruiting parade in town. Routh lost his first boy in Bowen and his first head of house. We know it came from India with the Garwal rifles.
At dawn he fell, just as the German trench was reached, at the head of his men. Of the 550 who went into action, 180 returned.
OB Egypt reported
There has been quite an accident scrap here at last.
Humphrey Humphreys survived the war. He studied at Harvard and became Vice-Chancellor of Birmingham. From Alexandria.
I would sooner have been near Cairo, where there would have been more interest in the way of antiquities. I had a thoroughly enjoyable and interesting voyage. It finished uneventfully, though we went on losing a horse or two every day from ship pneumonia. I managed to save all that except one, which arrived alive. It was too weak to stand up and had to be shot in the queue. It is very hot by day, but nights are delightfully cool, and we sit and sleep on the sand. We cling to the flesh pots of Egypt, and having picked it for breakfast, lunch and dinner, we trudge every evening through a mile of sand to dine like Christians in a hotel.
Many thanks for your wishes for my birthday. I never anticipated that I should enter on the 30s, the ante-room of middle age, in such an outlandish spot as this. There is little prospect of anything happening on any scale. Our chances of any considerable excitement here are, at present, small.
Jude, hark.
There stole upon our ears an indefinable sound, almost impalpable, and yet increasingly insistent, a sound which jarred discordantly on our high flights of thought. At first, we paid no heed to it, but its everlasting note gradually forced itself on our senses. The corncrake. Here at last was a topic quite original, and one that could hardly fail to procure the sympathy of all whose daily tasks take them to the kiteless building. Rumours have reached us of nocturnal excursions to track it to its lair, but judging by the increased vigour of the bird's tune, it has safely eluded all its aims.
Yours of the sleepless nights suggested
Might not the corps be turned out one day with fixed bayonets and lads to hunt our enemy at home, the corncrake?
a corncrake near Kiteless, now almost extinct in our islands. An editorial moves us.
We would apologise that we have made no mention of the war, for the reason that we thought it would be a pleasure to see something in print that contained no allusion to it.
Sir Lancelot Barrington Ward was surgeon in charge of the Serbian Relief Hospital at Skopje.
We arrived to find Serbia in an awful state. Typhus was raging, hardly controlled by a handful of English doctors and a few nurses.
Conferred by the King of Serbia, he received the Order of Saint Sava. But look at this further information discovered. And who did he operate on in 1918? Her Majesty's father, no pressure. And he was one of the Queen's surgeons too, and she was represented at his funeral. Staff shortages.
Dr. Fulford comes down every weekend from Devonshire to take chapel services and classes in English.
Of Henry d'Estaire Head,
It was only the other day that Ted was with us. As cricket captain, mainstay of the 15, foremost athlete, school monitor, the straightest of fellows, he took a large place in the hearts of his contemporaries and represented our best traditions. He went to France, since which he has been in the thick of things. The end came to him not in a fair fight, but in the foul poisoning of gas. His splendid constitution struggled for a week, and there were moments of hope, but he died at the clearing station at Ayla.
In July,
Anyone visiting the cricket field will be startled by beholding, instead of the peaceful scene of an out-of-date horse slowly hauling the mower, a brilliantly painted red and green monster slaughtering out the field at a pace enough to make the old horse turn in its grave.
it cost £31. The Literary and Dramatic Society read A Midsummer Night's Dream.
Apparently, anything that pertains to making love does not appeal to most members of the society. Halsell read Puck extremely well, though he might have been a little bit more fairy.
A letter from the wife of an old Bromsgrovian reflected on an obituary.
He is quite unknown to me, but in the quiet English way of stating the manner of his death, surely one reads of yet another very gallant gentleman.
Commemoration Day, Tuesday, 27th July.
There were none of the usual ceremonies after the service. In the afternoon, the call was inspected by the trustees in camp at Chartford.
Anyone would have been struck by two features. Firstly, the rain. Secondly, the gramophone. Our thanks are due to the headmaster for the way in which he came down, morning and evening, wet or fine, to take praise. Thanks were expressed to Mrs. Bullock for the trouble she took in managing the canteen, and for the excellent food. We fed like kings, nay better, for what is more enjoyable than to come after a long wet day, wet and hungry, to sit down on one's bedroom to a good steaming meal.
Field operations were at Clent and on the Lickers.
We returned at 3, after which there was free time for bathing and tennis, or anything else that pleased. High tea at 5. Retreat at 7:10 when the guard paraded. Sing-song occupied the time from retreat until 9, when we gathered round the pavilion steps for evening prayers. Biscuits were issued and we turned in at 9:45.
The weather forced us to billet in Cyprus, where the corps slept on the floor of the upper corridor and 3 of the forwards. It was an always cheerful, keen camp. Tents stretched drum-tight with rain, nights spent in Cyprus corridors, route marches where capes were essential, sentry duty at 1 a.m. on a pouring wet night, with creepy shadows and eerie moaning of the wind all around one. All very jolly, you know.
SRV Travers, head of schoolhouse and football captain of distinguished appearance in this team photo, even though he suffered a very bad eye injury in our laboratories. He joined the Munster Fusiliers and was killed by a sniper at Gallipoli.
No one who had watched his whip of his 15 could doubt that he would show himself a dashing leader of men, or that in the hottest place he could be at his coolest.
His younger brother, here in his study, fought alongside him. They were Irish gentry from County Cork. He rose to captain, transferred to the RAF, and flew on the northwest frontier of India, but after the war drifted, never fully recovering. He eventually ran away with Molly, a family house parlourmaid, and went into service with her, ending up as a servant at Sandhurst, dying in the 1950s in a poor state. Ironic that young officer cadets were being served by a well-worn public school ex-officer pilot with a distinguished war record. He renounced everything to run away with the girl he loved. Captain Charles Whitley was great friends with Edmund Page. Here is Page at Keeble, remarkably rather jaunty, with cap back and surely a smirk. But this is the Page who will battle through the horrors of Ypres, and their lives were to be closely intertwined in the war too. 2 days after the declaration, they thought they would get to France more quickly as privates, but they were refused permission because they were too valuable as NCOs. They persuaded Routh to pull strings. He knew King George V's secretary, and they were given commissions in the King's Royal Rifle Corps. August, the infamous Ypres salient.
The battalion waited interminably in a ditch. It poured with rain. Shells came over regularly on the road. Ypres was The waiting was damnable, the prospect mournfully impressive. Orders arrived to take position before dawn struck the middle of the road. We suffered horrid casualties going through Routh. The boss had a very heavy barrage on the road. I've never been so frightened. In the morning they saw us in showers with amazing accuracy of airbursts. Half the company was blown to pieces.
Charles was wounded. As we crouched together in a hole in which a few men were sheltering, I dressed him. He did not faint. He was hit high up on the right thigh. Half a pair of scissors which he was carrying were driven into the wound.
3 months later, Charles returned just before Christmas. Not fit, but what a joy to see him.
A month later, an OB was killed in the same place. Leslie Wingfield Sweet Escott, Oxford and Bucks Light Infantry.
From the start, he began to make his mark as a leader, and had I been asked before his death who was the best officer we had for coolness, courage and presence of mind for an emergency or any special ticklish job, I should have said without hesitation, Escott. His was the finest kind of courage and self-control, of the man who knows what he is in for. He would have gained distinction had he lived.
The final entry in his diary.
I pray God that I may be given strength and courage to fight in a manner worthy of my old school. This morning there was Holy Communion at the bar. To fear death is to doubt Christ. We at Bromsgrove have learned too much to do that. Deo, Reggie, and Keenan. And so we go forth. Whatever may be before me, I know that God ordereth the best. To pass early into the Master's garden is a blessing.
He had just had his first leave and spent the last night of it here. He expressed the wish that in the event of his falling, his bank balance might be given to our endowment fund. He is commemorated on the Menin Gate, and a stained glass window is in the vestibule of chapel and has 2 inscriptions, the school motto, and he trusted in God. His father was governor in turn of the Seychelles, British Honduras, and the Leeward Islands, and he permitted the printing of this remarkable poem found in his clothing, an old Bowen to his school.
We don't forget, while in this dark December you sit in schoolrooms that we know so well, and hear sounds that keenly we remember. The clock, the hurrying feet, the chapel bell. Others are sitting in the seats we sat in. There's nothing else that's altered there, and then when leaving it, the same old Greek and Latin. You know, you don't forget.
We don't forget you in the wintry weather, manning the trenches, training frozen snow. You play the games we used to play together, in days of peace that seemed so long ago. But while you're at it all, your games, your cheering, we other hosts in sterner conflict to meet, and other sadder sounds our hearts are hearing. Be sure we don't forget.
If we, your brothers true, for all your praying, to this dear school of ours return no more, but lie, our country's debt of honour paying, and not in vain, upon the Belgian shore. Till that great day when at the throne of heaven, the books are opened and the judgment set, our lives for honour and for England given, our school will not forget.
Reginald Hartley was a towering figure at school.
Dead ere his prime. For never was a life more full of promise, giving more joyous hopes. Hartley was one of those who leave their mark wherever they pass. At school, it seemed only natural that he should be head monitor, football captain, cricket captain, and holder of every office in town. He had from early youth the rare combination of literary gift, practical efficiency, and athletic skill, an appearance of unusual distinction, the keenest interest in nature and in life. The Bromsgrove, but only when he himself was editor, owed much to his steady pen, and his graceful lines so that the laying of the foundation stone of kindness were a tribute which he delighted to offer to the school.
The war broke out as he was leaving Oxford, and he hastened to offer himself for service. Military life had no attractions for him, but he knew that he could manage men, and that brought its own reward. It is fitting that he should have fallen in an effort to save one of his wounded. It is the leader's task, and in all things he always led. His short life has been a full one, full of honest work and honest play, and his life and death alike are full of inspiration for those who come after.
Meanwhile,
I do not apologise for trespassing upon your valuable space, as I consider the matter of which I am writing to be an important one, and one which will appeal to the whole school. I refer to the method which has lately been employed in depriving us of our hair. All appeals to leave us enough hair with which to make a parting are in vain, and we leave the hands of the shearer in much the same condition as do sheep. Let us try to look like respectable members of society instead of shaming criminals. Hoping this appeal will find a place in your heart, I am yours, Sean Head.
and another worry,
Old Bromsgrovians have often asked on revisiting the school, is the tunnel still in existence, or how is the tunnel going? It was our most treasured belonging. We almost worshipped it. Now, sirs, it seems to me that since this is so, and since the tunnel is the most unique part of the school, it ought to be a matter of no trepidation to bring to your notice that since the dining hall has been transferred to Littleton, the tunnel has only been used by a small minority of the school, who pass down it for a fleeting moment when going to breakfast. At other times its only inhabitants are toads, generally squashed, dead leaves and water. In view of which, sirs, I should like to propose that steps be taken to ensure the tunnel being used by the whole of the school, and the means to getting entrance to the library, for instance.
but it fell into disuse. The basics. Friends. Do boys ever change? One of the finest rooms in the school today. A fascinating view of a classroom with a wall map. Edwardians. Gordon. A bit of attitude on the right. Keeping fit. The end of the road, then. Millington in the trees. Little change today. Ivy was fashionable. Who is talking to who? They wouldn't dare do that today. They love their photos, mainly of teens, but Nelson's Lady Hamilton too. A second Spreckley was killed on the penultimate day of the year, Arthur Freer, Captain Indian Army. He married Ada in Bengal in 1912, a daughter 1914, a son 1915, both born in India. The family returned to England, but he was wounded in France, and they were due to return to India in November 1915. The son was poorly, so was simply left behind. That was not uncommon, while the rest of the family took passage in the SS Persia. A P&O liner built in Scotland, it was torpedoed and sunk off Crete by Commander Max Valentina. Persia was carrying gold and jewels belonging to a Maharaja. The wreck was located off Crete in 2003 at 10,000 feet, and an attempt made to salvage the treasure.
The last scene of the family was the mother frantically seeking the daughter around the decks of the ship, followed by the father seeking the mother.
AF was the best type of English officer. Fearless, resourceful, modest, and good. Though his efficiency and athletics marked him out in the school, he will be remembered by his intimates not for these, but for a courtesy of manner, and innate delicacy of mind which lent his companionship an indefinable charm as the sea.
Christmas cards are being sent by the headmaster to all serving in His Majesty's forces. The cards contain a photo comprising new and old parts of the school.
We have been unable to trace any. 22 OBs have been killed in 1915. C.K. Thursby Pelham, bottom right, to photo, here in front of Gordon, and also at camp right, was clearly a character at school, and here he is at Blues in a selfie with the Scottish borderers. He gained promotion and even served on Montgomery's staff in the next war and landed on D-Day. 6 former Elkington on a deck chair on the green outside. His family had discovered silver plating employing 1,000 in a famous works in the jewellery quarter and supplying the crowned heads of Europe. This piece is in the Hermitage, St. Petersburg. They also provided these for first class. He was dangerously wounded in the head at Ypres, was taken to the casualty clearing station, but died before his father could see him. There are very sad telegrams at the Public Record Office in Kew. At his parents' request, the school motto is proudly inscribed on the headstone, followed by "Until the day breaks and the shadows flee away." Another of Routh's boys from Gordon was killed. Chattock was school monitor, head of house, the 15, the 11, gym colours, 5's captain, and lance sergeant.
He was killed, aged 19, visiting an isolated position. He had only returned from hospital the day before, and though urged by his captain to rest and do no work that night, it was characteristic of him that he should have preferred to do his job. Those who knew him best feel that he died as he had lived. Here at school, it was ever his aim to do his job. And whether in work or play, he set a fine example of grit and perseverance. But it is rather for what he was than for what he did that his many Bromsgrovian friends will cherish his memory.
Mr. Chattock has kindly presented to Gordon House the sum of £25 to provide an annual prize to his memory. It has been decided to place an oak board in the dining hall, on which the names of prize winners will be inscribed. The prize will be awarded to the best all-round fellow in the house.
The board remains, and the housemaster here this evening still awards it. John Girth Morgan, left, was the fifth child, known as Little Girth, the great favourite of them all. Two of his brothers played for Wales, and he played for the 11 and 15 for 3 years, taught in Buenos Aires, but quickly returned. He had a shoulder prone to dislocation, which prevented him from being accepted, but he got a doctor friend to certify him fit. He joined the South Wales borderers in Iraq and is interred on the banks of the Tigris in Baghdad. Humphrey Humphreys, South Midland Mounted Brigade Field Ambulance, again.
I have been having a pretty awful time. A German player appeared and bombed my hospital. To do justice to the gentle Bosch, he probably mistook my hospital marquee for HQ, as he couldn't see my flag from up aloft. I mounted a red cross on top, and the next morning when he spoke to us, he left me alone. For several days we were worked by fixing his machine. On Easter Sunday morning, the storm broke. Our camps were attacked by overwhelming odds of 10 to 1, German camel corps and Turkish regulars. We retreated at the canal, and I was in and out of the saddle for 30 hours on end without a meal before.
It wasn't a pleasant experience. My men worked splendidly, and I brought away every wounded man of the force. The Turkish fire was very heavy and accurate, and I had a number of hairbreadth escapes. But all's well that ends well. I was personally congratulated. I got back, but it was due as much to the wonderful work my mules put in. My gallant mare carried me over 70 miles, counting the galloping to and fro during the fighting, and at the end was as gay as ever.
But read between these lines.
I may get a chance soon to send you an uncensored account of the whole business. I cannot say much more, as I believe it is intended to represent the whole affair as a British victory. But you will draw your own conclusions as you count up the casualties.
All my kit has been captured by the Turks, and I have only the clothes I stand up in. I am quite well and unwounded, so don't worry.
But 2 OBs did die on that ill-fated Easter day, in that same great battle of Katia, a great disaster for the British Army, and one was our school doctor. Dr. Bealby was born in Midlothian and educated at Edinburgh and Vienna. He was our medical officer, surgeon to the cottage hospital, bailiff, member of the district and county council, and he resided at Perry Hall.
It is surprising no one knew him that he met his end in an effort to help others. Captain Bealby declined to retire with the others, but remained behind to attend to a wounded officer. He was never seen again. For 20 years he had been a school doctor and its firm friend. It's not easy to find the limits of his kindness and good temper, though both must have been sorely tried. To hold the balance so fairly that no malingering is allowed to shine, and none really unfit is allowed to play, is no light task.
A member of the first 15 was quite wantonly rude when he was forbidden to take part in a match. Dr. Bealby declined to have any apology offered or rebuke administered, on the grounds that anyone whose liver was so out of order might be harmed much.
There was no need for him to go to the front, and no need for him to give his life as he did. Being himself, he could not do otherwise. We offer to Mrs. Bealby and the boys the sympathy of those who knew his worth. His name is on the Jerusalem Memorial.
An Ottoman force led by General von Kressenstein made a surprise attack. Arthur Valentine Holyoake left Queen's Own Worcestershire Hussars.
As At 4:25 a.m. in thick fog, a sentry reported that he could hear voices. The yeomanry could have got away, but would have had to leave the dismounted engineers to their fate. There was only one thing to do: stay and fight it out. Of 20 officers and 230 men, only 9 officers and 56 men were left, and most of them were wounded.
He was captured and marched with 8,000 from Egypt through Jerusalem, Damascus, Beirut, Aleppo and Ankara to a prisoner of war camp at Yozgad. Many died on the way and at the camp, but he survived, and he did organise fox hunting, a theatre and set up a Masonic lodge. It's the only story we have of the capture of an OB.
The enemy was so near that I got out my revolver. I hated the idea of being bayoneted. I was a very poor shot with my revolver, and I began to wonder how near I ought to let me get before I fired. Suddenly I heard the colonel's voice: "Cease fire." I'd expected fixed bayonets and then charge. It never occurred to me that we would surrender. "Put down your arms and hold up your hands." That was the next order. The Turks came forward and began looting from us anything that appealed to them, at the same time motioning us towards their rear. There was a sandhill just in front, and I went to the left. Two of our men went to the right. To my horror, I saw them bayoneted by Turks. But on the whole, the Turks behaved well.
They debated
that it is not in the interest of the Allies that the United States should join in the war.
Payne considered
that the Americans would talk a great deal, but do very little.
Hark, forget the Germans, it's back.
What is it croaks without the hall, where studiously great and small are toiling, and annoys them all?
The corncrake.
What grates away in rain and mud, and makes you long to spill its blood, or hold its head beneath the flood?
The corncrake.
Go for a bomb to stop that grate, may gas or shell asphyxiate and utterly annihilate.
The corncrake.
Page and Whitley were now at the Somme. The battalion was to capture orchards at dawn, Charles's C Company in front and B Company under Page in support. Bombardment and retaliation were terrific. Charles led his company with 2 pistols and a stick with wonderful gallantry. A piece of shrapnel went straight through his right forearm before the attack started, but we could not persuade him to go back. The battalion lost 20 officers and 2/3 of its strength. That led to the Military Cross for conspicuous gallantry in action. He had remained on duty 12 hours after being hit.
Commemoration Day will be kept quietly again this year.
10 died in the Battle of the Somme, 6 in July, 2 on the first day of the battle. Head Monitor Tasker is to the right of Routh and died aged 28. He left a son aged 3 months. Sergeant Percy Hemming was a day boy, school monitor of 15 and 11, and he was headmaster of nearby Kroll School, and his last entry in the school logbook records his intention to serve until the end of the war, or as long as His Majesty requires his service. He is commemorated on the Teakful Memorial with 73,000 others.
Considerable improvements have been made to the heating of the chapel. Gas radiators have been installed. One is in the headmaster's pew.
Routh kept warm. Zeppelins were a threat, so
To conform with lighting restrictions, big school windows have been treated with coats of green distemper.
Reginald Skelton, on Scott's first Antarctic expedition and chief engineer of the Discovery, was one of our most distinguished OBs and accumulated various honours for service at the Battle of Jutland and on the White Sea at Archangel. Douglas Estill from Johannesburg was killed at Delville Wood, and the battle is of particular importance to South Africa, their first major engagement. Their casualties catastrophic. 80% were killed. Yet they held the wood as ordered. It was described as the bloodiest battle hell of 1916. And believe it or not, just a few yards away from him lies another Bromsgrove. Major Charlesworth, King's Own Yorkshire Light Infantry. This was their holiday home in Scotland. After Magdalen College at Cambridge,
joined the family colliery firm, but a few years later retired, travelling widely and shooting big game in East Africa. He volunteered immediately and met his end while leading 2 companies to a special attack.
the OTC marched 8 miles and an abnormally hot one to camp at Hagley Hall. Mr. Routh and the officers went by the Great Western Railway. But the account is eloquent about it.
The fact that the headmaster was able to find time to spend the whole 9 days in camp gave us all the keenest pleasure. It's hard to say what camp would have been without him, and what he did.
After church parade, Lord Cobham inspected the corps and delivered a stirring address.
Of the pleasant memories, probably the best are the time you pass listening to the gramophone, the delight of cooling oneself on a stifling afternoon in an open-air bathroom under huge trees. Or yet again, standing in the glow and warmth of the cookhouse fire at 3 o'clock in the morning and pondering the loneliness and silence of the night. And what of the sing-song? What of the canteen? What of the ubiquitous gramophone? What of the excellent food? What of Visitors' Day? What of the headmaster, with us always? And the last memory of everyone will be that of lying in his tent and listening to the tuneful, or otherwise, good nights, and mark you once and for all the weather perfect.
Captain Stewart, Connaught Rangers, was cheerful to the last, sending a message of comfort to his mother and
thanking her for all that she had done for him.
Leonard Cameron Kidd, Royal Flying Corps, extreme left, middle row, was the first OB pilot to be killed. He was tea planting in Ceylon when war broke out, but he returned as soon as possible. His diary could have come from a Biggles book. With all the gung-ho recklessness of youth, he was
twice lost in snowstorms and once landed in the field, but plunged over a 10-foot ditch, through a hedge, and finally into a corner of a wood, smashing the machine to atoms, but escaping with a bruised ankle.
But in the most devastating passage this evening,
Yesterday, I walked through Freetown. Never again will I go over a battlefield if I can help it. There are words that describe it. Not a group left standing, and the whole place full of smoking holes and dugouts and shattered bodies. God knows how the Russian infantry standard. I'm sure I don't. They say that's the enemy's point of view. He has all the sport and the minimum of danger.
though they had no parachutes. A week before he died,
I am alive and kicking and enjoying myself tremendously. We had great sport a few days ago. We came to within 500 feet and sprayed a lot of the enemy in a dugout. I never laughed so much in my life. They didn't know which way to run, and we bagged the whole lot of them.
2 days before he was killed, he was elated.
Cheero! I got my military cross today. Thank goodness. I did want something to show for the solemn job. I got my machine well straight by machine gun fire 3 days ago, and again yesterday. At the last show, I had the left plane main spar shut away, a fuselage strut, 1 through the rudder post, 5 through the plane, about 6 inches from my head. Yesterday, I had one come up through the floor.
His final entry,
I had a lost time the other evening. We had just finished our reconnaissance job over enemy lines, signalling shots to batteries, and had started home when an inlet pipe blew off and I had to land among the shells. We landed all right somehow. The mechanic arrived 2 hours later and took the machine to pieces, and we got back here at 1:30 a.m. It was an awful sweat getting the fuselage into the road, pushing it over trenches and shell holes.
he was killed with his observer by friendly fire. His CO wrote,
He was hit by one of our own shells flying over German lines at 1,500 feet. He was a great loss to the squadron, and was one of the pluckiest pilots I've ever known, as he was continually doing daring work. The only consolation I can offer you is that he was killed instantaneously in doing his duty for his country.
a fellow pilot wrote,
He was universally loved.
Now, Kidd's name was on the Arras Flying Services Memorial, but recent research established that the two were buried next to each other in Caterpillar Valley Cemetery, and the rededication ceremony took place 101 years after they lost their lives on October the 12th last year, and we were represented. As the year closed, there was a concert attended by poet Lawrence Binyon, who wrote the most famous lines in the remembrance service. The words come from the second of 3 verses. Elgar set them to music, and the work was performed in Big Stool. 23 of these had been killed in 1916.
for only patriarchs can remember the last time they were skating at Bromsgrove. A half-holiday was granted by the headmaster.
Landboys?
The headmaster informed the school that their services had been offered to neighbouring farms. 1 weekless day is now in force. There will be no leave on Friday to any shops that sell food.
Dear Sir, if we are consuming more than our appointed rations, may I suggest an obvious solution? Let us get up an hour later in the morning, on the principle of he who sleeps forgets his hunger.
Dayboys were houseless and wore a red ribbon.
Now that it's been realised that division of houses is desirable, may I make a plea for the dayboys? We cannot welcome the 11, much less a 15, and our 2 o'clock sports day is mere mockery. Yet it is hardly our fault. The spirit is willing, the flesh is weak. Could we not be apportioned up amongst the new houses?
Humphreys, Suez.
I I think it probable we shall be in France before the summer. We are all much encouraged at the prospect. I have been employed on sideshows so long that I badly want to see something of a big push before the war is over.
The editor.
There was one noticeable feature in our last number, which we deeply regret that we cannot repeat in this. It was almost the first issue since the war began in which our OB news contained no names of OBs killed in action.
Wounded soldiers came over from Blackwell Sanatorium.
They were received by the monitors, watched the Gordon-Willington match, and afterwards were entertained to tea and a small concert, the soldiers contributing some of the items themselves. They departed in excellent spirits in a break, to the accompaniment of much cheering on the part of the school.
House colours were introduced.
I once did take my way, or Chalford's blessed story. It was on my house match day, the school we walk abroad, with ribbons and rosettes galore, of mauve and brown and cream.
One of the most cherished institutions at Bromsgrove in the summer is bathing. To come hot and dusty and paddle about the baths at will, or bask in the sun, clad in a bath towel, Tober fashion.
But cricket prospects were poor.
The lack of a groundsman, the shortage of petrol for the motor, the difficulty of obtaining matches, and the demands made by military and agricultural authorities combined to make the lot of the captain of cricket far from enviable, and he has our sympathy.
Brevet Major Dent was killed by a shell which demolished the building where he was having tea.
His wife and little daughter survived him.
Charles Whitley now lost his life in an attack that so typifies the war. Edmund Page.
We expected to get relief for troops, but we went into battle tired men. In position, shivering with nerves and cold and a drizzle of snow and sleet, orders reached us that 0 hour was postponed 24 hours. I shall never forget those hours of waiting while our artillery finished their work. Just before dawn, I talked to Charles. His spirits were wonderful. He knew his company would go anywhere with him. His young officers were desperately nervous, but Charles's amazing spirit kept them going.
At 1 a.m. we were visited freezing trenches by Brigadier General Skinner, sent to discover why the advance had halted. It was soon obvious to him that any advance up the hill was sheer madness. Skinner sent back his situation report, but was overruled. At 4:30 the attack orders arrived, and in spite of all protests, we were ordered to carry them out.
One division never left the trenches. The B Company under Whitley
Made a most gallant attempt to push forward, but from the start it was an impossible task. And the staff who had ordered the attack, if they'd ever come near enough to have looked at the ground, would have realised it too, and would never have ordered the attack. Whitley's body was found nearest the wire, which was totally undercut. The whole show was a complete failure from want of preparation and organisation on the part of the staff.
the enemy cleared out that same night, abandoning Hill 90.
Charles died instantly from bullets carrying away the lower part of his spine. Sergeant Melville brought me some of his things and broke down telling me of what he had done for them.
Whitley's father was MP for Everton, and in St George's Hall, Liverpool, one finds his statue with Peel, Gladstone and George Stephenson. As a young man, his son had donated Kiteless. Now the science block was to be built in his memory and known as the Whitley Laboratories. In 2010, prior to Commemoration Day and the imminent opening of the refurbished and expanded facilities, we remembered this fine young man whom Routh called the third founder of our school. He is one of the few names read out by the headmaster in the bidding prayer at St John's. He is with monarchs, baronets and lords. And how delighted Charles would have been to know that we gathered there that day. How proud Edmund Page would have been to know that we remembered his gift of the original science building, and to know that his sons and a grandson were present. Cecil Cutler, RFC, on the right, was killed flying. They looked like Spitfire pilots, and he looks RAF. Private Price, Saskatchewan Regiment, fought in the Great Battle of Vimy Ridge. He was from Stoke Pryor originally. He's remembered on that vast monument and watched over and lamented by Mother Canada. A third Spreckley fell, Guy Lessingham.
Refusing the commission, he went out as sergeant. He met his end by setting the noblest example of personal bravery to his men. He was in command of his company, was wounded early in the action, yet refused to go back. Wounded again, he still kept on, but a third missile struck him, and he fell dead in the moment. He is commemorated on the main gate.
He and his two brothers stood here for everything that was sportsmanlike and manly. Differing greatly in their respective gifts, they were alike in the service they rendered in the school and in the affection they felt for him. The youngest fell, the eldest drowned. Now GL has rejoined them. They leave behind them a wonderful record of clean, healthy lives out of unusual courage. They will be the first to bid us not to mourn their loss, but ourselves to do our share.
The family added a plaque to the reading desk, and having lost her 3 Bromsgrove children, daughter-in-law and granddaughter, Mrs. Spreckley was the parent invited to lay the foundation stone of the memorial chapel. This is ironic today.
Dear Sir, being one of the younger generations of Bromsgrovians at the front, and having spent over a year of war at the school, I should like to say with what intense pleasure I received a box of cigarettes from the school. While at Bromsgrove, I regarded quite impersonally and almost mechanically the gifts of cigarettes that we used to send to OBs. But when a similar gift arrived from me, it brought an entirely new feeling. It was a real and personal message from the school, a vivid reminder of old days and old associations, and above all, a personal assurance that I was not forgotten. It is that which is most treasured out here, and it is that for which I cannot find words to thank the school as I would. The memory of Bromsgrove is ever with me, and I long for the time when I can see the school again. With best wishes for success in everything, I remain yours sincerely, O.B., France.
The war seemed far away that summer.
All seemed to have gone with great smoothness, the machinery being greased by those necessities of a good term, good health and good weather. One interrupted afternoon's cricket is the sum total of inconvenience caused by rain. No epidemic, and the sanatorium has had but few occupants. Energetic people with nets and bottles range the countryside at intervals. Nowhere is one safe from the tip of the camera. We wish those going farming in the holidays the best of good luck and good weather.
E.G. Edelman, Lincolnshire's centre captain, was gassed. Born in Florence, he spoke English, Italian and German. He transferred to the Intelligence Corps, served again in World War II, and in 1961 wrote With My Little Eye about spies in both world wars, and he looks like a spy. Captain Hugard, intelligence officer, was killed. His elder brother died at Gallipoli. The boys were born at Dungannon, County Tyrone, where their names are inscribed on the war memorial. Here is the boy's father cheering troops on their way. He was to lose both his sons. Second Lieutenant Frank Bernard Worm, Essex Regiment, top right, will be awarded the Victoria Cross. He had already been severely wounded.
It was only in May that he was able to go on active service again, and the end came in a few weeks.
His Majesty the King has been graciously pleased to approve of the award of the Victoria Cross.
For most conspicuous bravery when in command of a small party in a raid on the enemy's trenches. He gained his objective in the face of much opposition, and by his magnificent example and daring, was able to maintain his position for a considerable time. Grasping the fact that if the left flank was lost, his men would have to give way, Warren leapt onto the parapet and ran along the top of the trench firing and throwing bombs. This unexpected and daring manoeuvre threw the enemy off his guard and back in disorder. This gallant officer was severely hit for the second and third time and mortally wounded.
On the first day of term, that account was read by the headmaster to the school, everyone standing. A letter from his Batman, Private Voller, to his parents.
A war landed between us. Mr. Warren received his first wound in the leg and would have been fully justified in going back, but he utterly refused to go. I bound him up as best I could. Once the enemy retired, I got him into the trench, where he sat, directing things as calmly as ever.
I think I will go back, Voller, if you will help me.
He was hit again on the forehead and yet again on the back of the neck.
When I saw his face, I knew beyond doubt that my officer was dying. I sat beside him, holding his helmet over his face to keep off flying stones. He turned to me and said,
"You have done well, Voller." And then he died, with the same smile on his face it always wore when it was pleased.
5 men helped carry the body. 1 was killed.
I would this tale had a different ending. Believe I did my best.
How to remember the dead, an historic meeting and decision. Sir F.W. Fryer, Governor of Burma, presided in the cook's room.
The headmaster stated that 3 proposals had been made: to enlarge the present chapel, to found scholarships, and to build a new chapel. Routh pressed to raise a large sum for a permanent memorial in the form of a new building. The chapel, in view of the growing numbers, was a pressing need, and was the most fitting memorial, in that it would enshrine the spirit which led to the sacrifice, and could contain in itself a visible reminder of those who had fallen. Other proposals were withdrawn.
B.F. Braithwaite's
machine was attacked by 4 German aeroplanes. He was seen getting out and being led away.
The school was expanding.
The lower fourth has been divided into 2 parallel forms. There are 158 boys in the school.
The Braziers are a famous local family and built most of our buildings from 1850 to the 1980s. Albert Edward Brazier, Royal Warwick's, was killed by the bursting of a shell immediately above him and is remembered at Tynecott, Passchendaele. A service was held on All Saints' Day. Routh preached. The anthem was, "They were lovely and pleasant in their lives." The editor was stoical.
This term, as every well-behaved team should, is passed quickly. It is very difficult to settle down to a serious year's work with the uncertainty caused by war still continuing. We cannot help wondering whether we shall do just the same next year, or whether still more radical changes will have to be made in our existence. But we are not pessimistic, and while we are still allowed our customary games, we will not complain.
The Sprecklers presented a football cup with the inscription,
They played the game.
the 15 played Dover College, relocated to Leamington, the RFC, and the Northumberland Fusiliers. They received a letter from Braithwaite in hospital in Germany with a bullet through the left foot and a cut about the face. But,
I am not badly wounded.
and on display tonight, C.A. Green's OTC certificate. The telegram from King George V and Queen Mary, deeply regretting the loss you and the army have sustained. And the usual dead man's penny given to his family. 25 OBs had been killed in 1917. L.W. Moore took evocative photographs around Cambrai, which encapsulate our image of the war. He survived.
We apologise for the lateness of this number. Of course the war is responsible. How invaluable this one word is to a careworn editor. But for the benefit of the curious, the printing of food cards was considered more pressing, even than our own timely appearance.
The number of boys is greater than it has ever been. There are 170, of whom 8 are in Elmshurst, an overflow house. But a real outrage on our doorstep.
So, certain poor children in the town have gained possession of school caps and are wearing them. Something should be done to prevent it. It was disgusting.
Captain Dewdney, seated on the floor, was awarded the Croix de Guerre, but fell in the March offensive. His last words were,
Tell the Colonel, I have done my best.
Percy Dean was 41 when he won the VC. He loved sailing and joined the Naval Volunteer Reserve, but could never have imagined the heroic actions he would perform in a famous raid on Zeebrugge. 3 old warships were to be scuttled to block the harbour and trap the German fleet. HMS Vindictive was to land 200 men to disable German shore batteries, and volunteer yachtsmen were to captain motorboats to evacuate sailors from the sunken ships. Dean captained ML 282, and after the rescue, the frail boats would escape past the by then disabled batteries.
It went badly wrong. One ship hit an obstruction and sank prematurely. The other 2 were sunk successfully at the narrowest point. Dean manoeuvred his launch under enemy fire as 26 batteries and 229 machine guns fired down. HMS Vindictive had come alongside the mole at the wrong place, and guns could not be silenced. The tiny motorboats were under intense fire, but Dean saved 100 lives. His boat was in the harbour for an hour and went furthest up the canal to rescue men. While leaving, 3 crewmen standing next to him were killed, but he heard an officer was in the water, and immediately turned around and hauled him aboard. Then the steering mechanism broke down. All seemed lost, but he manoeuvred the boat under the mole so that the guns could not be depressed sufficiently to hit it. Once out of the harbour, he found himself alone and facing a 65-mile journey to the nearest port. But HMS Warwick came to his aid.
The London Gazette.
It was solely due to this officer's courage and daring that ML 282 succeeded in saving so many lives.
The VC was presented to him at Buckingham Palace, and he was one of the 100 VC-strong Guard of Honour at the burial of the unknown warrior at the Abbey. Dean became MP for Blackburn, defeating pacifist Philip Snowden, who was to become Labour Chancellor of the Exchequer. He came to Commemoration annually and was a hero to the boys. He's commemorated in Golders Green, Blackburn Town Hall, and at the Zeebrugge. The Times, 1939.
What manner of man was the slave merchant of Blackburn? His father died when he was young, and he rescued the family business. All his spare time from Easter to September for many years before the war was spent in cruising small boats in Liverpool Bay and the Menai Straits, with a cruise to the Irish and Scottish coasts in his summer holidays. He was the best companion a man could find, in fair or dirty weather, shore or afloat. He was good company and to be depended on. To his shipmates, from the Baltic to the North Sea, down Channel to the Hebrides, the seas have lost some of their savour with his passing. We shall not see his like again in the little ships that sail the narrow seas. A great personality is gone, leaving behind affection, happy memories, and a fine example of manliness and service.
He would have done well at Dunkirk too. A DFC went to William Miles Thomas, who flew in Mesopotamia with the brand new Royal Air Force, founded in April. He became a baron, managing Morris Motors, and then was chairman of BOAC during the Comet crashes. He wrote the first guide to Heathrow Airport. Sir Lionel Whitby lost a leg in 1918, but treated King George V and travelled with Churchill in the next war. The corps was busy.
The Enfield 1940 patent rifles are enormously better than the rather inferior rifles we had to use. Field Day at Routh was followed by a march back to Worcester, where, through the kindness of the mayor, it had what tea is possible with his days in the Guildhall. 70 cadets would be harvested in the Newport.
NF Hall recorded a story about lock-up. The schools studied together in Big School.
A great deal of the responsibility for the discipline in the school fell upon Routh, as we expected a somewhat ineffective temporary master to take over. We arranged to receive him by kicking an empty waste bin basket down the gangway as he walked up. The first move lay with me. I kicked the basket towards Embry, but at this moment I was impressed by the stillness that had fallen upon the audience, and looked up to see that R.G. had come in instead.
As he went out, he said,
"Paul, come and see me after supper."
discipline awaited, but instead, such kindness.
I knocked on the study door. No answer. I poked my head inside. R.G. was sitting in a chair reading. I went up. I shifted my feet. I coughed. His deafness was never more impenetrable. After an eternity, he looked up with a start and said, "Oh, Paul, hey there. I have Edmund Page coming to breakfast tomorrow. Will you join us?"
Page was on leave and in the same unit as one of Hall's brothers. Embry would be shot down over France in 1940, be captured, escape, and become Commander-in-Chief of Fighter Command. We are weeks away, but 6 died in October. Captain Keppel Palmer in the first tanks, Private Bentley, Royal West Surrey, at over 40, one of the oldest to die. A volunteer stretcher bearer, he was reported as presumed killed in action. He was a bachelor, devoted to his library, and a keen fly fisherman. Captain Carter,
Naturally of a retiring disposition, he hated prominence. His monitorship and cricket captaincy were both undertaken from a sense of duty which was conspicuous in all he did, and which led him, for he had no love of soldiering, to take a commission as soon as possible after the outbreak of war.
Twice severely wounded, he was killed instantaneously by a shell in his tent. In him there passed one of those gentle yet brave spirits who sweeten life for others, and then, unconsciously, a greater strength.
at last.
On Sunday evening, the 17th of November, the school attended a special service of Thanksgiving in the parish church.
The end of the war, about which everyone had talked so much, seems to have come at last, and with a suddenness which has quite upset us, and from which we are only just beginning to recover. Armistice Day passed here amid scenes which quite outshone the efforts of our predecessors at the end of the South African War. But for all that we find it almost impossible to realise that at this moment there is no one being killed in the whole extent of Flanders and the other battlefronts, to realise that our roll of honour has come to an end at last, and that we who are here will never be able to bear our part.
A more informal account of Armistice Day was recorded, in which the excitement of the boys is very evident, so too the impact of stress upon Routh.
We had known that something was in the air. I was standing on the top of Kiteless steps at 11 o'clock when 3 black crocodiles began to weave across the playground, one coming from school, another from Gordon House, and the third from the outhouse day boys who came in at the old gateway. They were halfway across the playground when the maroons went up. Each crocodile froze into stillness for a brief second. Then, with no guidance and no direction, they converged on the chapel and settled themselves there and waited for 20 minutes before the chaplain arrived to conduct a spontaneous service. Thereafter, work was discontinued. In the early afternoon, a number of boys from different houses went downtown in various forms of fancy dress to find the town also on vet. The school had recovered itself by 4 o'clock, and normal classwork at 4:15.
Routh had been in London all day and had neither seen nor yet heard of all that had taken place. He returned about 9 and was furious.
We were going to bed when messages came round that all who had taken part in the demonstration in town were to report immediately to his study. He was ashen grey as fatigued with emotional strain, and made some very cutting remarks about the disgraceful scenes that had taken place in his absence. Dancing on the graves of dead Bromsgravians was one sentence. Next morning, he had heard a more complete account of the young sister. He did not miss some of us, but, in addressing the school to announce a morning off after prayers, he went out of his way to refer in very different terms to the proceedings of the previous day.
In the last year of the war, 18 OBs had been killed. 427 had served, 93 died, just under a quarter. No other school equals the proportion of Victoria Crosses. Nationally, 25% of those who served received disability pensions. We can therefore assume that half of Bromsgrovians who served were killed or in some way disabled. And then, at such a moment, came the great flu pandemic, which infected a third of the world's people and killed over 50 million.
Boys, masters, nurses alike fell before it. 10 boys were gravely ill, and there was a day when not more than 40 boys could be mustered for school.
Influenza, Spanish influenza, malarial fever, trench fever, septic pneumonia, call it what you will, we have had it. Practically everyone has had it. At our lowest ebb we were. Even school doctors succumbed.
But no one died. The War Office thanked the OTC by building us an armoury and presenting us with 2 German field guns. In 1919, 3 died from wounds, and R.D. Cotton from Finstall is the only OB interred close to his school in Bromsgrove Cemetery. Arthur Holyoake was repatriated, enjoying a peace dinner at Yozgad and travelling by rail from Ankara in 31 days. He was at Cherbourg on the 30th of December. Many were seasick, but tried to sing Auld Lang Syne as they saw England again. New Year's Day and England at last. He returned to the family law firm, married, had 2 sons, wrote a book about Droitwich, and died in 1977 at Wychbold. He could have been killed at that San June. Arthur Chater Pepper left and John Rupert Wilson Wright on a yacht in the late 1920s. Pepper flew with the Royal Flying Corps, was shot down and made a prisoner of war. We still award a prize in his name at Commemoration. Wilson was blown up and left for dead in no man's land. And soon after this photograph with his family, he killed himself in 1932.
Deceased has been very depressed ever since he came from the war. Witnesses had known him from a child, and before the war he was bright and cheerful. But after he came back, he did not seem the same man.
But one English soldier in the summer of 1918 had heard a nightingale sing in a solitary bush, and he said it was the only soothing moment in the trenches, and he believed that the song symbolised a new world.
childhood loves the summer's long caresses, and whispered memories of happy days, she gazes idly on the next strife of batting ball on patting hearts and life.
Like some great giant on his elbow leaning, old Kaitos lies and listens to the cries that gladly daunt defeat and welcome winning, watches the restless horses scorn the flies.
Deep in the nodding chestnut shade, the playground dreams the afternoon away. The school for us is peopled by her dead, who found in duty more than lies and fame, who dared with us unsuffered and are sped.
The chapel whispers each unanswered name. At every corner some remembered face smiles and is gone, and courage takes its place.
The first proper commemoration since 1914, the most emotional in our history, Routh.
5 years ago, we were gathered here for our last commemoration. Today in the parish church, we have rehearsed for the last time the list of those who have done honour to the school and added to the lustre of her name. I do not wish to add any sadness to this occasion by thinking or dwelling too much upon the past. But we should not let today pass without thanking both those who are dead and those who are living for what they have done in these last years for England and for us.
Applause.
For God, King, for neighbour. Through long years the words have been blazoned on the walls of this school, but they have been spelled for us anew by sons of Bromsgrove in splendid deeds. We shall raise to them a worthy memorial, a new chapel. That which we think they would all most have desired, but we can raise no memorial which can compare with that with which they have erected to themselves, an example for future generations.
Applause.
These last 5 years, which have been difficult for the country, have been not less difficult years for schools. I want to thank parents for the consideration and confidence which they have shown us through that trying time. It has not been possible to keep things educationally up to the usual pitch. We could not help ourselves. I desire also to thank my colleagues for all the help they have given during this difficult time.
Applause. But Routh's last words were typically a tribute to the boys.
I want to thank the boys, especially the elder ones, who have borne a burden very unusual to be laid upon fellows of their age. While those of the older generation have been doing their duty nobly on wider fields, the present generation has, to a very large measure, been doing its duty remarkably well within the walls of the school.
Applause. A modest man of deep faith, Routh led Bromsgrove School with quiet reassurance. Staffing difficulties had mounted. There was no end to the extraneous parts that he himself played, as a speaker for many a wartime cause, consultant for neighbours in trouble, a tireless kitchen gardener. At the camp at Hagley, he was honorary chaplain, banker, postmaster, public relations officer, and most welcome of guests in every tent. The account of that camp included a tribute to him that sums up best his leadership of the school.
Let us signify our gratitude to the headmaster, who was with us, always.
And the master reminisced,
Those many who received letters from him while on service will understand the telling of this story by one of his colleagues, who knocked uselessly, for he could not hear, very late on his study door. Entering, he saw no one, but there was a little pile on the desk showing that R.G.'s nightly pile of letters was done. Only as he turned to leave did the visitor see him, still unaware of any intrusion, on his knees.
in his study, I often thought of him opening letters and telegrams, writing to bereaved parents and reflecting on what words to say yet again to the school, telling boys their brothers had been killed. That photo of his house, A fifth would die. Housemasters here tonight would shudder at the mere thought. Many had qualified to be officers in the event of war, in the OTC here. And when war began, they went to him to sign their blue forms, to state that they had Certificate A. Travis's record at Kew has the blue form signed by Routh. What on earth went through his mind until he died in the 1960s? By went the war's reputation through the war poets, the full awareness of the terrible slaughter, the so-called stupid generals, when the reputation of it had sunk so low. Routh gazed out on Kyklus in 1918, but saw in his mind's eye beyond his vision of a memorial chapel. We honour the memory of the fallen tonight, but also the leadership of a school, of one great man. One can understand his utter determination to build a memorial chapel and to see it finished. And his address at the completion in 1960 must surely be the greatest ever made by a headmaster of our school. He had completely lost his hearing, but neither his eloquence nor his passion. 91 years of age, he stood like a pillar of rock in the sanctuary. He only moved when he came to the chancel steps to preach. He did not move his head, his hands, or his feet, and he made no gestures. He concluded, "But for you of the school today, these must be mere lists. Only when, as a daily habit, you come into this chapel with your wandering thoughts and your outside interests, never forget, never, I charge you, forget that you are treading on hallowed ground. For this place enshrines the memory of those who gave their lives so that you are sitting here in safety today. Sometimes we dare to hope that they of whom we think today caught something from this school which gave them hope and courage and light in darkly clouded days of pain and death. They were his boys. He knew them all. He remembered. And so should we. Always.
It is written that time flies over us quickly, that leaves its shadow behind. Time has flown. It certainly doesn't seem 4 years. None of us heard Philip's original rendition, taken from his remarkable book. It left a lasting impression then, and somehow a much more lasting impression tonight. By contrast, the duration of 4 long years of war 100 years ago would have seemed an eternity for those who lived and survived. The shadow that it left behind was perhaps the darkest and most dismal of the last century. Not surprisingly, the school has changed greatly since those times, but some things remain refreshingly the same as they would have been to a returning old Bromsgrovian soldier after Armistice Day, whose centenary we commemorate next month. Not least the buildings in the historic quarter of the foundation plate displayed in the foyer tonight, comprising what was the headmaster's house, big school, the chapel, and of course the tunnel. Philip's devotion to all things historical relating to the school has been so perfectly and profoundly demonstrated this evening, supported so ably with the participation of friends and colleagues. We're left with the supreme irony that the Great War was vowed to be the war to end all wars, a pledge that proved horribly wrong. For within 20 years, a new generation of old Bromsgrovians were ready to answer the call of king and country, all with the noble aim to safeguard the future and freedom we enjoy today. This time the school was uprooted and evacuated to Wales upon 24 hours' notice. A younger generation of old Bromsgrovians followed the footsteps of their elders, and acts of heroism were repeated and medals were won. If you should think that that should be a prompt for a new book, you'd not be wrong. Mr. Bowen's eagerly awaited book documenting the school at war and in Wales 1939 to 45 is to be published next year to coincide with the 80th anniversary of the Second World War. We look forward to that and his series of presentation, which will be launched both here and in Wales. But back to the present, ladies and gentlemen. On Philip's behalf, may I express our thanks to him and to his fellow colleagues in making tonight's presentation so very memorable. Our appreciation goes to Mark Beat, Clara Elmore, Catherine Ward, Alistair McClure, with songs by James McGilvey, our Director of Music, accompanied by Neil Barry, and the final music played so poignantly by Heidi Colley. Thanks also go to Chris Dowling for running the slide presentation, and to our archivist Nikki Thorpe for tonight's exhibition, and Megan Griffiths, our alumni manager. So let's give them all thoroughly deserved round of applause.